What happens when the world's richest nations, desperate for energy and control, once again set their sights on Africa's soil? After being turned away by several African nations, Europe has found a new target, the Ivory Coast, where recent reports confirm a massive discovery of lithium, the so-called white gold of the 21st century. Lithium powers everything from smartphones to electric vehicles, and as the world races toward green energy, whoever controls lithium controls the future. But this time, the story isn't unfolding the way it used to. The people of Ivory Coast are saying no. They're refusing to be another victim of exploitation disguised as partnership. They've seen this movie before. Gold, cocoa, oil, and they know how it ends. This time, they want a new ending. To understand what's happening in Ivory Coast, we have to rewind a bit. Europe is facing one of the most serious energy crises in modern history. The continent's ambitious plan to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, electric cars, solar panels, and battery storage, depends on one critical element: lithium. The problem? Europe doesn't have enough of it. Lithium mining is dominated by countries like Australia, Chile, and China. China, in particular, controls more than 70% of global lithium refining capacity. For Europe, which has been trying to reduce its dependency on Chinese supply chains, this is a major geopolitical vulnerability. So European leaders began looking elsewhere, to Africa, the world's richest continent when it comes to raw materials. In recent years, countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, Malawi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo have become hotspots for exploration. European delegations promised billions of dollars in investment, infrastructure, and trade opportunities, but there was a catch. Those same countries began realizing that these deals looked very familiar. The contracts heavily favored foreign companies. The raw materials would be exported unprocessed. The profits would flow back to Europe, while the mines would leave behind little more than dust and poverty. And one after another, African leaders began saying no. Then came the big discovery. In early reports from geologists and mining firms, large lithium deposits were confirmed in Ivory Coast's western region. Analysts quickly estimated the deposits could be worth tens of billions of dollars, enough to place Ivory Coast among the top lithium-rich nations in the world. Almost immediately, European investors started to arrive. Diplomatic envoys from France, Germany, and the European Union began scheduling quiet meetings in Abidjan, the Ivorian capital. To them, this was a lifeline, a new source of lithium that could help stabilize Europe's green transition. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Across Africa, people had grown increasingly aware of how natural wealth had historically been extracted without benefit. They had seen promises of development dissolve into environmental destruction and deepening inequality. And in Ivory Coast, a new generation was determined to avoid repeating those mistakes. As news of Europe's sudden interest spread, a wave of public resistance began to grow. In local towns near the discovery sites, community leaders started organizing meetings. Activists, journalists, and youth movements began to ask questions. Who benefits? What happens to our land? What guarantees do we have that this time will be different? Many Ivorians remember the country's painful history with cocoa. Despite being the world's largest cocoa producer, most farmers live in poverty. The profits are made overseas by chocolate companies in Europe and America. Now, they fear lithium could follow the same path. One Ivorian activist put it bluntly: "We don't want another resource curse. We want development, not exploitation." That message struck a chord. Soon, the debate moved beyond social media. Civil society organizations demanded full transparency in all mining contracts. Local chiefs insisted on environmental assessments before any exploration could begin. And in a rare display of unity, communities across the region stood together to tell Europe, "Our resources are not for sale, at least not on your terms." To understand why Ivorians are so cautious, we need to revisit the concept of the resource curse, one of the most tragic ironies in modern economics. It's the idea that countries rich in natural resources often end up poorer, more unequal, and more unstable than those without them. Why? Because resource wealth tends to attract corruption, foreign interference, and economic dependency. Take Nigeria, one of the largest oil producers in Africa. For decades, oil revenue has enriched elites and multinational corporations. But millions of Nigerians still live without electricity or clean water. Or the Democratic Republic of Congo, home to some of the world's largest deposits of cobalt, another key mineral for batteries. Despite this immense wealth, Congo remains one of the poorest countries on Earth, with ongoing conflicts fueled by competition for mineral control. Even South Africa's platinum industry has brought more controversy than prosperity, with striking miners and environmental degradation dominating headlines. This is the pattern the Ivory Coast wants to break. Ivory Coast's lithium discovery could make it a global player or a cautionary tale. For Europe, the rejection from African nations has been a rude awakening. In the past, European countries could easily secure mining rights through diplomacy, aid, or influence over local governments. But that model is collapsing. Across Africa, there's a growing sense of economic nationalism, a belief that Africa should no longer just export raw materials, but instead process and refine them locally. Zimbabwe, for instance, banned the export of raw lithium in 2023, insisting that all lithium must be processed inside the country. Namibia followed suit with similar restrictions. Now, Ivory Coast is taking the same stand, refusing to sign away its mineral wealth without guarantees of value addition, job creation, and environmental protection. This shift marks a new era in Africa's relationship with the world. For the first time, African countries are negotiating from a position of confidence, not desperation. Europe may have the technology and the money, but Africa has what the world needs: the minerals that will power the future. Ivory Coast's caution also comes from experience. In the 2000s, the country's oil and gas sector was open to foreign investment, with promises of economic transformation, but the results were mixed at best. The wealth never truly reached ordinary citizens. Instead, corruption and mismanagement flourished. And the environmental damage, oil spills, deforestation, polluted rivers, left deep scars on rural communities. Now with lithium, people fear the same pattern repeating: rich deposits, foreign companies, and local poverty. But this time, they're armed with knowledge. Economists, activists, and journalists across West Africa are working to expose unfair contracts and hold leaders accountable. Universities are researching ways to process minerals domestically. In other words, Africa is no longer just watching, it's thinking ahead. This isn't just an African story, it's a global one. As Europe scrambles for lithium, China and Russia are quietly watching. China already dominates the lithium processing market and has strong ties with many African governments. Russia, too, has been expanding its influence in Africa through mining partnerships and military cooperation. So Europe's rush to Ivory Coast isn't only about resources, it's about geopolitical positioning. It's about who controls the future of global energy. Ivory Coast, in this sense, has become more than just a country with lithium. It's become a battleground for influence. But unlike in the past, African nations now have options. They can choose their partners, negotiate better terms, and even develop regional alliances to strengthen their bargaining power. The age of dependency is fading, and that's what makes Europe nervous. Perhaps the most powerful part of this story is not the lithium itself, but the mindset shift happening across Africa. For decades, Africa's wealth was defined by what others wanted from it. But a new generation is rewriting that narrative. From Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré to Mali's Assimi Goïta, and from Zimbabwe's economic reforms to Namibia's resource sovereignty, young leaders are challenging the idea that development must come through foreign dependence. In Ivory Coast, youth groups are using social media to educate communities about the dangers of the resource curse. Local economists are advocating for sovereign wealth funds so that mining profits are reinvested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This is the Africa that is emerging, bold, informed, and unafraid to say no. Unsurprisingly, Europe isn't happy. Some European analysts warn that Africa's defiance could slow down the global energy transition. Others claim that local restrictions make foreign investment too difficult. But African commentators see it differently. They argue that Europe is not upset because of delays. It's upset because it's losing control. For centuries, Africa was the supplier and Europe the beneficiary. But that equation is changing. The rejection in Ivory Coast symbolizes a continental awakening, a demand for fairness, dignity, and equality in global trade. As Europe rushes to Ivory Coast with open checkbooks and shiny promises, the people are standing firm. They remember the past and they refuse to repeat it. This is more than just a fight over lithium. It's a fight over sovereignty, justice, and the right to control one's destiny. The resource curse has haunted Africa for decades, but it doesn't have to define its future. If countries like Ivory Coast can turn their natural wealth into genuine development through fair trade, local industry, and transparent governance, then the curse can be broken. And perhaps, for the first time in history, Africa's minerals will not just power the world, they'll empower Africans themselves. Because this time, Africa isn't begging. This time, Africa isn't silent. This time, Africa is saying no.